Now, there's no doubt about it that to this very day, a lot of Star Wars fans remain divided based on what happened with the sequel trilogy, based on how Kathleen Kennedy essentially handled the character of Luke Skywalker in The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and yes, even The Rise of Skywalker, since it was her call to really delete all of the flashback scenes that George Lucas had helped JJ on with, and to really just keep him strictly bared down to a Force ghost. And that's one thing that a lot of people did not really respect. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new, and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. Now, there's been a lot of things happening between the fans and, of course, the creatives over at Lucasfilm, and one thing that I do have to say that I do respect very well about when it comes to Mark Hamill has a lot to do with the fact that he stays very much direct with the fans, he stays in tune with the fandom, he tells us, of course, a lot of things that happened over at Lucasfilm, and one thing in particular was not too great of a story toward Kathleen Kennedy, so to speak, and how it involves the character of Luke and what she did to the character, what the fans could have gotten, and Mark Hamill just spilled the beans on exactly what really was supposed to be in the sequel trilogy films. So let's dive right into this. Now, given that, yes, Mark Hamill has always complained about Lucasfilm's treatment of Luke in the sequels and what he actually disagreed with when it came to The Force Awakens, and especially with The Last Jedi, and how Disney made him essentially retract a lot of those statements, to really kind of pull back on those statements and really, kind of just make believe that he was supporting all of this for the past couple of years. Now, that brings us to the next big thing about what Mark Hamill had to say about Kathleen Kennedy, and like I said before, it's not the nicest thing here. So with many new Star Wars projects in the works by John and Dave, creators John and Dave are beginning to focus on many announcements to be made later this year. However, recently Mark Hamill engaged in an interview where he stated the following to the fans about Kathleen Kennedy. Well, one thing, of course, when I got the call to join episode 7 many years ago, when Michael Arndt was writing the story, I was just thrilled to be a part of these new movies. I will never forget that Michael gave me the call to return as Luke and the way he was going to do it. He was going to make Luke a very prominent figure, entering into the first film around before halfway through, and having a big influence on the Rey character at the time that was unnamed. But later, things began to get very difficult with creative differences due to Kathleen Kennedy's part not agreeing with his direction. That was soul-crushing to me as an actor and as a person and as a fan. I even tried fighting this and tried to keep my prominent role intact, as this was George's idea as well that got passed on to Michael. We went through, I would say, around 2 whole months of creative struggles on how Luke was going to be utilized into the upcoming film at the time. Now let me stop right here about what Mark Hamill's putting out, is that, I don't know if you guys knew this, but Michael was the original writer of The Force Awakens before JJ took over, and Michael did have a way better vision. But eventually Kathleen Kennedy was getting in the way. She felt that Luke being so prominent was stealing the limelight away from the new characters. Like Finn at the time was called Sam. I believe Rey was being tossed around as Kira before even JJ got on board. And there was a lot of things going into it. Now, obviously, there were a lot of things that went into The Force Awakens. A lot of creative struggles and a lot of differences. It's exactly why throughout 2013 and 14, you were hearing so many different stories about the plot and where it was all going to go and how Luke was going to be a major influence on the story. Physically, visually speaking, in the present, not in hiding. And that, to me, guys, would have been the ultimate thing to do. The Luke that we got in The Force Awakens, I'm not complaining too much, because it was, I believe, still to this day, a legendary climax to a Star Wars film, but it was the follow-up that really kind of bounced back on The Force Awakens. The Last Jedi really underused Luke in the worst way possible, that kind of took away that special scene and atmosphere of the ending of The Force Awakens. So, moving on to the next thing, what Mark Hamill has to say is even all the more revealing about Kathleen Kennedy's efforts to just water down Luke Skywalker as much as possible, and to really keep the character at bay. She always felt that Luke was going to steal the limelight away from at the time, Kira and Sam and all these different characters such as the Jedi Hunter, which was basically Kylo Ren back in the day. But moving on. He goes on to say, when Michael was no longer part of this project due to the differences, this is when Kathy began to have JJ minimize my role to a bare 30 seconds, which I thought was seriously unfair at the time. I just couldn't believe that they were going through with this. Luke was going to have so much action and so many important scenes to be shared with Rey in Michael's vision. It was going to be something what every fan would expect out of the first film of the sequels, for the first time in over 30 years for the original cast. He even wanted to have a reunion between the three main characters, and Kathy eventually split that all up. It was horrible and just awful. It haunts me to this day of what fans could have gotten if Michael had stayed on this movie and put forth his vision on the big screen. So guys, it wasn't just about Luke being prominent. That's not the biggest shocker here, is the fact that Kathleen Kennedy literally ripped apart a potential reunion scene between Luke, Han, and Leia. They were going to do that in Michael Arndt's script, they were going to do that in his vision, and it never came to light because of creative differences between Kathleen Kennedy, Michael, and others at Lucasfilm. Not a big surprise, this is what always happens with Kathleen Kennedy all the time, and it seems like, this is something that's not to be reasoned with when it comes to Kennedy's vision. It's always about watering down Star Wars, right? And so, that's the thing about Mark Hamill, is that he is very passionate about Star Wars, not just because he played Luke, but let's not forget, but his son Nathan Hamill is like a diehard fan, and I'm sure a lot of that reflects on Mark too, and how he actually gets to see that every single day, of how passionate fans can really be. And so I think that's why it was so heartbreaking for Mark, and so soul-crushing, because he really knows how the fans react at home, because his own son is a diehard fan, and it makes a lot of sense right then and there. So, I'm really, it's very unfortunate that Mark did not get to work with Michael when filming, and how a lot of this was passed on to J.J. Abrams, which Bob Iger, by the way, was the guy that forced J.J. and everyone at Lucasfilm to play things safe. They wanted to copy a lot of elements from A New Hope, and really kind of just create a low-key carbon copy of that first film of the original trilogy. I'm not saying it's a direct copy through and through, but a lot of major scenes even copy that. There's even a trench run, of all things, at the end of the movie. There's even a Death Star, basically, Starkiller base. It's things like that where Bob Iger wanted to play things very and extremely safe to kind of somehow create that magic again, that spark of success, right? And that, I think, was the major criticism at the time for The Force Awakens. It wasn't necessarily the writing or the acting, it was more or less the carbon copy elements of A New Hope that a lot of people criticized it over. So, yeah, Mark, putting it out there that this story by Michael was going to be a lot more original, it was going to focus on Luke more, it was going to be something of its own, and it's just sad that we didn't get to see that. So guys, fill me in below in the comments what you all have to say about this, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel. I thank you all so very much for the kind support, and I'll catch you guys next time.
From night to moon, we hear them moans again. No.